Posted by you/Youngleman99. Serious, people of Reddit who have encountered ghosts or other supernatural beings, what was your experience like? What happened? If you hear stories about Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh, Scotland being haunted, I advise you to believe them. I was visiting the city with my boyfriend. We were taking one of the haunted walk tours. Our guide was excellent. She was dressed all in black, very gothic, and was a talented actress. Being 6 foot, and 5'10", we towered over the 2 other couples and the 2 hen parties that were on the tour with us. Out of respect for them, we stood in the back of the group. When we arrived at the Covenanters prison, worth a Google search, I thought our tour guide was laying it on wonderfully thick. She seemed genuinely concerned for our safety. She discussed how people get pushed, pulled, scratched, extension. She told us that there was no shame in wanting to leave. If we got scared, she would lead us out. We were having a great time. And then something yanked on the back of my hair. My boyfriend saw me jerk back and we both spun around. But we were at the back of the group. It was impressively strong and it scared the crap out of me. We continued into a crypt in the Covenanters prison. Again, we stood at the back of the pack, but this time I was a little less happy about it. While our guide talked, I felt another tug on my hair. This one was much weaker than the last, so I could have just caught my hair on my jacket or purse. I was pretty freaked out. Some of the girls from one of the hen parties were pretty impaired. One girl was standing in front of us. I remember thinking she was very brave to wear white pants and a light yellow t-shirt to the muddy cemetery on a rainy day. She started jerking her right knee forward at an odd angle. After a few times, she turns around and yells, "Stop fucking kicking me." Shit. My boyfriend and I look at each other and the other couple standing beside and slightly in front of us. None of us were anywhere near her. Now, this girl was pretty intoxicated, so while I was already freaked out, I was prepared to disregard her, until the last kick. I was watching her leg and clear as day. She bent her knee forward and gasped, and I saw a muddy footprint appear on the back of her pants. They were bright white and we all confirmed after the fact, that it was a footprint. We could distinguish toes. At this point, I grabbed onto my boyfriend for dear life and held on until the guide was done talking. As soon as she was done, the other couple joined us in running out of that crypt. We all chatted with our tour guide and a couple of her co-workers for a while. She told us that our experience is pretty standard there. She wasn't acting when she warned us. I tell this same story every time the question is asked, so here goes. Woke up to get a glass of water at night, and passed my dad on the way to the kitchen. I asked him something about where was he going. He walked right past me like he didn't see or even hear me, just was in a type of trance, and he walked out the front door. I looked out the front window, and he was sitting on our sidewalk under a tree, hands on his knees staring into the dark. I went to my mom's room to ask her what dad was doing. She said, "What do you mean? He's right here?" She scooted over, as there was my dad, laying in bed asleep. I was staying with a friend in a remote house in Scotland. At midnight, I woke up to go to the toilet and suddenly it was very, very cold and I heard someone complain they always make this room dirty, always, and I'm cleaning all the time and still it is dirty. It was so cold for a moment and then it was over. The next morning, I told the house owner that last night it suddenly was very cold in the bedroom when I went to the toilet, and before I could say anything else, he asked immediately, "WHO have you seen?" That WHO part sent shivers down my spine. Not what happened? But WHO have you seen? Later, he told me his daughter and son-in-law had lived in that very room and the son-in-law had died in an accident. He loved to keep the room spotless. Even typing this still sends shivers down my spine. Our last house had a ghost cat in it. We have 2 live cats, a black one who is old and can't jump on anything higher than the couch, and a crazy white cat. I'd often be working around the house and see our black cat at my feet, reach down to pet him and he wasn't there. After a quick search, I'd find him in an entirely different part of the house having a snooze. For the longest time, I just assumed it was my eyes playing tricks on me. Then one time I was at the kitchen sink, doing dishes, and in my peripheral vision, I see our black cat jump up onto the counter beside me. I even heard the muffled thump when he landed on the countertop and felt a bump on my arm as he headbutted me. He hadn't been able to jump that high in a couple of years, so, of course, I turned to fully look at him and, nothing. No cat, empty counter. I was in a motorcycle accident a few months back. I broke my spine and needed surgery to fuse several vertebrae. As they brought me into the surgery, I noticed 2 men standing in the corner of the OR looking not at all surgically clean and entirely out of place. Looking back at it, I later recognized them as my 2 late grandfathers. One of them died in the hospital, the other died during a surgery. The reason I know that was my grandfather because my parents told me a story about how they were in the hospital's food court during my 11-hour surgery, and my dad heard his father telling him that everything was going to turn out all right. He told my mom, and she wasn't at all surprised, because she had heard her father tell her that I was going to be fine. Even though this was late, they were the only ones in this dead silent cafeteria. I've never told that story before, let alone to the entire world. I lived in this house with a basement, and every time I walked up the stairs I would get this weird creepy goosebumps feeling on the back of my neck. It didn't make me uneasy to go down the stairs or to be in the basement. My craft room was down there and spent a lot of time there. After a while, I would have items I was using disappear when I would look away from them. I would search and one day I got frustrated and to no one in particular I said to her, "Can I please have my scissors back?" I had just looked under the pile of new mail and when I turned my head, there were my scissors on top of the pile of mail. I talked to my neighbor and she told me that the original owner of the house was a jolly old man who loved to prank people. And that he had fallen coming up the stairs one day and died. I think the goosebumps were him trying to tell me to be careful. And every time after that, when something would disappear, I would politely ask for it back and it would appear in a place that I could not have missed before. Thanks, old man, it was fun. I was a complete skeptic before this incident. My wife and I rented a secluded small 2-bedroom cabin in the Mount Rainier, Washington area for a hiking adventure. Upon arriving, my wife walked into the house and said there was no way she was sleeping in one of the bedrooms because there was bad energy in the room. In her defense, it was a bit creepy, weird doll dress on the wall as decoration, a rickety rocking chair in the corner, and an oddly placed door that was locked but presumably lead to the attic. Once we got settled, we discover a cabin journal with entries from the past guests. There were multiple terrifying entries. My husband woke to the smell of bacon and eggs cooking. No one was awake yet. The doll dress in the bedroom is the gateway to hell. We woke last night to the sound of something walking in the attic. The locked door was unlocked and open when we woke in the morning. I called BS on all this, telling her I didn't believe any of it. We decided to sleep in the living room on the floor nonetheless and closed the door to the creepy room for the duration. The next night, after hiking all day, we were eating and drinking outside at night by the fire. A few adult beverages into the evening, I started daring her to go into the bedroom. She was freaked out and wouldn't, but I said there was nothing wrong with the house and I proceeded to go inside to take the challenge of exploring the room more at night. As I entered the hallway, my hand hit the doorknob and I turned the handle to push the door inward to enter the room. The door opened about 10 inches and stopped as it hit a chair that was propped up against the door. My mind quickly calculated the logistics of the situation. The door opens inward, a room with only one entrance, and a chair on another of the door keeping me from entering that was somehow placed there from the inside. I let out a little girly scream, slammed the door shut, and played it off to my wife that I was trying to scare her. We stayed the night and I didn't tell her the real story until the next day when we were in the car driving away. She was pissed. I've posted about this before, but I'll tell it again. I'm a lover of horror/supernatural/creepy things. I spent a lot of my teens and childhood ghost hunting with my friends in random graveyards, rundown neighborhoods, abandoned factories, etc. That being said, we never really encountered anything other than psychosomatic ghosts that our overactive imagination created. Despite loving horror, I didn't believe that any sort of corporeal ghost was real. When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Ettel, Germany in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double on the second floor, my sisters had a double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single room all to myself at the far end of the hall. When we went to check into our rooms, as soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling as though I walked into a wall of bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, but I passed it off as overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues other than waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air was crushing. It unnerved me even more that I wasn't the only one who felt weirded out, plus she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented in my head that that wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully, when at about 2 a.m., I'm woken by something ripping the covers off of me and being jerked about 2 feet towards the end of the bed by my ankle. At first, I thought someone had broken into my room because when I turned towards what had grabbed me, a huge looming black shape was visible in the darkness like a man was in my room. I frantically flipped the light on, only to have there be nothing. The window was locked from the inside, there was no one in the closet or the bathroom, and my room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night scared shitless, playing Cooking Mama on my DS. The next morning, we're at breakfast and my sister mentions that she was up half the night because she thought she saw a person silhouetted against the wall of the room, But when she turned on the light, there was no one there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience. We checked out that day, so I didn't get to experience anything after that, but it still freaks me out to this day. Growing up as a Navy brat, I lived in several houses but only one was haunted. Thing was, it was a brand new house. However, the land was old and had a bloody history. This was in Virginia, where you could throw a stone and hit something Colonial War or Civil War or slave trade related almost every time. This brand new, ranch-style house was always cold. Even in the hot, humid summers. You could turn off the AC and it would still be cold to the point that my toes would cramp up. Lights were always flickering despite the wiring being new. Doorknobs were always being jiggled. The door that led into the garage was always shaking. Mom, who never bought the concept of the house being haunted, would say, "Oh, that's the wind going through the garage." Never mind that the garage door was almost always closed. We never parked the car in there. It was more or less used as a storage space. The rest of the doors would close themselves a few seconds after being opened. Not slamming themselves, mind you. Just slowly closing themselves. Thing is, they hadn't always done this. For years they stayed open. Then one day they all seemingly decided to start closing by themselves. I always had this uneasy feeling of being watched by something. One night, whatever or whoever it was, touched me. I'm 11. Being 11 and doing things 11-year-olds do, I sneaked out to the living room in the middle of the night to watch some late-night television. Like every kid who does this. See, I had my face inches from the screen and the volume almost down to 0. An itch began to build right between my shoulders. Almost like someone was poking me. I reached over and that's when I felt it. A hand. A man's hand. My fingers touched in between fingers and brushed knuckles. I gasped and turned around. Nothing. I turned off the television, jumped up, and ran back to my room. Under the covers, I buried myself, hoping that whatever had touched me wasn't going to follow me and start poking me again. It didn't. But after that, I didn't sneak out to watch late-night television for months and months. When I finally did, I would watch the screen for a minute and then turn around to make sure no one was behind me. No way was I going to be poked by a ghost again. After my grandmother died, I'd wake up during the night, or perhaps I was still sleeping, not sure, and imagine her sitting alongside my bed in her rocking chair. It was given to me after she died, the chair that she rocked me in as a child. She'd talk to me as if it were real, and I'd answer back. It was always pleasant and gentle, never scary or upsetting, as I've mentioned in an earlier post. I never wanted this recurring visit, night after night, to end. I was sad when eventually it ceased and she appeared no more, just an empty rocking chair to look at. My grandparents used to have a really beautiful painting of my aunt hanging in their living room. And yes, she is still alive. Anyways, when I was about 5 or 6, I was sleeping in their living room one night when I heard it talking to me. It was her voice and it talked to me just like she would have. It was weird because I was calm and not scared, even talking back, but I knew that paintings don't talk. Eventually, she told me to go wake up my grandpa and tell him she wants to talk to him. I went and woke him up, and when he realized I was talking about the painting, he got pissed. He was yelling at me when he suddenly stopped and stared out the window. Then his eyes got wide and he told me to hide in his bedroom and tell my grandma to call the police. He then grabbed a pistol he had hidden in his cabinet and ran outside. While she was on the phone, we heard 2 shots. He came back in after a few minutes and told us he shot one of the guys trying to break into his house in the arm, but they all got away. It turns out that prison for minors about 20 miles away had 3 escapees. They ran through the woods until they came to my grandpa's property and planned on looting what they could and using us as hostages if necessary. That is until my aunt's painting woke me up and told me to wake him up. I've had 2 very unrelated experiences that I can't explain. I don't want to jump to the conclusion that it was haunting, as I'm pretty skeptical of those things. I've simply had 2 experiences that I can't explain. 1. I was about 13 or 14 in my parents' basement, just passing the time waiting for my mom to bring me to hockey practice. I was in the house alone, sprawled out on a couch, listening to a Discman. Yes, I'm old. Our house had a storage room in the basement, and I was laying across from the door. Now, since I was a kid, I remember the door handle of this room would always jiggle. It used to scare the shit out of friends sleeping over. Like someone was inside, halfway turning the knob type thing. I always attributed it to the fact that the furnace was in this room, and so there must be some sort of draft. Anyways, on this particular day, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turn around, and the door was wide open. It has been closed, and then it abruptly closed as soon as I turned my head. Like something or someone opened it to take a look, and then got spooked that I saw it. I immediately jumped up and left the house. I just can't explain how a door opened like that, and then the moment I looked at it, it kind of slammed shut. 2. Fast forward to this October. I met a mutual friend in East Glacier, Montana of all places. I won't go on about the circumstances, but we were thinking of dating and living a long way away from each other, so met around halfway for a weekend. We got wasted at this local dive bar, and this nice guy offered us a place to stay for free. He set us up with a room and fed us liquor. We sleep. In the morning, she and I were talking and the room doorknob made a sound. We look over. It twisted fully, the room door opened, and nothing was there. I thought I was imagining things, but the girl I was with was scared stiff and we left. I later got the guy's number and texted him about it. He said something along the lines of, "Oh, don't worry, that's just Margaret." On the night of my grandfather's funeral, my brother and sister got into a huge argument. The three of us were staying at another family member's home in their living room basement. The two of them were on the air mattress on the floor and I was on the couch. I don't even remember what they were arguing about, but I do remember that it was very petty and they fell asleep while arguing with one another. I remember waking up in the middle of the night that night and seeing my grandfather, clear as day, standing in the doorway looking at my brother and sister and playfully/lovingly laughing at them. He was only there for like 30 seconds, then he faded away. I was the only one to see him, as the other two were asleep. My brother, sister, and I were all in our mid-20s when this happened. Ouija board story here. I wanted to hook up with this girl. During our first time hanging out, we watched Paranormal Activity. I forgot which of us suggested it, but we thought that trying to use an Ouija board would be a cool experience. The next day, she bought one and invited me over. We tried to mess around with it and had no luck. The little plastic thing was moving, though at this point I figured it was all her fucking with me. But the words it tried to spell out made no sense. Anyways, we YouTubed some videos and realized the plastic thing that came with the game didn't have a hole in the center, which is where the letter it is trying to show us would appear. We thought the tip of the plastic triangle thing is where we were supposed to look. So we decide to use a shot glass. Words start to slowly form and it tells us about some house where it and other spirits live, and that the owner was disturbing them by trying to get rid of them all. It gave us a phone number and this girl called it. At this point, I thought she was really trying to fuck with me and taking this far, but I wanted to get laid and went along with it. This went on for 3 or 4 days until I finally became a believer. She asked the board who our guardian angels were. It wrote her mother's name, who passed away at a young age for her. My turn. It wrote my grandfather's name but she honestly had no idea who he was. He was sort of a long-lost grandfather who I had met 16 years after I was born. He passed shortly after, due to cancer, and no one in my family ever spoke about him. I thought that was weird as hell. The board also wrote my best friend's name, who passed away from suicide a few years back. Maybe she knew about this. We did have some common friends. However, it wrote his name under an alias only a handful of people knew, our gamer nicknames. Both of these names blew me away. There was no way she knew this, so how the hell could this happen? Anyways, we call it a night. The next day tells me the lights in her apartment were turned on, but I convinced her perhaps she forgot to turn them off. The next day, she texts me saying she's turned them off and is now leaving for work. We get back to her place together and they are on. She asks me to sleep over because she's spooked. During that night, I hear what seems to be cups moving slowly in her cupboards. The toilet seat sort of slams down and later on, the shower head drops a bunch of leftover water into the bathtub, similar to when you shake it after a shower. I was pretty fucking scared. The next morning, we use the board again, and it tells us there is a new spirit around us, one that is trying to harm us. For some reason, the girl decides to ask whether it knows when we'll die. It tells me I'll die sometime in my 80s, while it tells her she's scheduled to die within the next few months. She shuts this shit down and puts the board away. Proceeds to tell me how she got raped last winter and the 2 guys who did it left her for dead, naked in the snow in a rural area. She managed to make it to a farmer's house, naked with frostbite, and called the cops. There was a court date set and friends of these 2 guys who raped her were calling her, threatening that if she testified, they'd find her and kill her. Eventually, not long after, we stop hanging out. I end up seeing her 2 years later working at a mall. So I guess the Ouija board lied. To this day, I don't know what to think of that experience. Maybe she made part of this up, but I can't explain how that board was able to spell my grandfather and best friend's name.